The moon hung low in the sky, casting a ghostly pallor over the dense jungle that surrounded the encampment. It was 1972, deep in the heart of Vietnam, and the war had ravaged not just the land, but also the spirits of those who fought. The soldiers stationed there had seen horrors most couldn't fathom: the brutality of combat, the unrelenting ambushes, the screams of comrades that echoed long after the gunfire ceased. But that night, they would encounter something far beyond the realm of human understanding, something that would haunt their memories long after the war ended. Private Ethan Grayson sat by the dimly lit fire pit, clutching a cigarette between trembling fingers. The jungle was eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant call of an unseen animal. The other soldiers, equally on edge, whispered among themselves. The night had a peculiar weight to it, as if the air itself were holding its breath. Grayson could feel it, a primal sensation crawling up his spine, a sense that something unseen was watching. The first sign came with the wind, or rather, the lack of it. The jungle, usually alive with the chirping of insects and the rustling of trees, fell into a suffocating silence. Even the leaves seemed frozen in place. Grayson glanced at his buddy, Corporal Mills, who was staring out into the darkness with wide, unblinking eyes. Mills opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, he pointed toward the tree line, where shadows danced in a way that defied logic. The flickering firelight shouldn't have reached that far, and yet the shapes moved, twisting and contorting as though alive. Then came the whispers. Faint at first, like a distant breeze, they grew louder, surrounding the soldiers in an unholy cacophony. It wasn't in Vietnamese, nor any language Grayson recognized. The voices overlapped, speaking in tones both seductive and menacing. Some of the men shouted, demanding the unseen enemy reveal themselves, while others sat frozen, their weapons clutched tightly. Without warning, the fire pit flared, its flames shooting unnaturally high into the air. The light illuminated the clearing, revealing something that made every man's blood run cold. Standing at the edge of the encampment was a figure, tall and gaunt, shrouded in a black mist that seemed to devour the light around it. Its eyes glowed an unnatural shade of red, and its presence exuded an overwhelming aura of malice. It didn't move, but the whispers intensified, now carrying an edge of mocking laughter. Mills was the first to react, raising his rifle and firing a burst of rounds. The bullets passed through the figure as though it were made of smoke, striking the trees behind it. The thing didn't flinch. Instead, it raised an arm, long and skeletal, pointing directly at Mills. In an instant, the corporal dropped his weapon and clutched his chest, gasping for air. His body convulsed violently before he collapsed to the ground, lifeless. Panic erupted. The soldiers scattered, some firing blindly into the jungle while others tried to flee. Grayson stayed rooted to the spot, unable to tear his eyes away from the figure. His mind screamed at him to run, but his legs refused to obey. The whispers morphed into a deafening roar, each syllable pounding against his skull. He thought he saw shapes moving within the black mist, faces twisted in agony, hands clawing at the edges as if trying to escape. Out of the corner of his eye, Grayson noticed Sergeant Vickers, the toughest man in the unit, on his knees, tears streaming down his face. Vickers was muttering something under his breath, over and over, like a prayer. The figure turned its attention to him, and the sergeant's body began to rise off the ground, levitating several feet in the air. His cries turned into blood-curdling screams as his limbs bent at unnatural angles. With a sickening crunch, his body crumpled and fell lifeless to the earth. Desperate to break free of the paralysis, Grayson forced himself to look away. He spotted his rifle lying a few feet away and lunged for it. As his fingers closed around the weapon, a hand, cold as death, gripped his wrist. He looked up and saw another figure, this one smaller but no less horrifying. Its face was a grotesque amalgamation of human and beast, with eyes that burned like hot coals. It leaned in close, its breath reeking of decay, and whispered a single word in his ear. Though he didn't understand the language, the meaning was clear: run. The grip released, and Grayson didn't hesitate. He bolted into the jungle, his boots pounding against the soft earth. The darkness closed in around him, and the foliage seemed alive, branches clawing at his uniform and face. Behind him, he could still hear the screams of his comrades, mingled with the unearthly roar of the whispers. He didn't dare look back. Hours, or perhaps minutes, later, Grayson stumbled into a clearing bathed in moonlight. His chest heaved as he struggled to catch his breath. The jungle was silent once more, but the air carried a suffocating heaviness. He fell to his knees, clutching his head, the events replaying in his mind like a nightmare he couldn't wake from. Morning came, and with it, the arrival of reinforcements. They found Grayson in the clearing, alone and incoherent. When they returned to the encampment, they discovered a scene of unspeakable horror. The bodies of his comrades lay scattered, their faces frozen in expressions of sheer terror. Some were mutilated beyond recognition, while others bore no visible wounds at all, as if life had simply been snatched away. Grayson was evacuated and eventually sent back to the States, but he was never the same. The military deemed him unfit for duty, citing severe psychological trauma. He spoke little of what happened, and when he did, his words were dismissed as the ramblings of a broken mind. But those who heard his story couldn't ignore the haunted look in his eyes, a look that spoke of truths too terrible to comprehend. Years later, Grayson lived alone in a small cabin far from civilization. He avoided the dark, never lit a fire, and kept every light in his home burning through the night. On the rare occasions when he slept, his dreams were plagued by whispers and the glowing red eyes of the figure. He knew it was still out there, waiting, watching, and deep down, he feared that one day it would come for him.